This part of the lecture addresses the work of Erich Fromm, who lived from 1900 to 1980, and we'll talk about the topics of alienation, 5 needs, freedom, escape styles, and love. So alienation is at the heart of Fromm's work. He suggests that this is a powerful feeling of isolation and loneliness, and the sense that one does not belong, is not valued, and has no role. We can be alienated from others, alienated from ourselves, selves with a capital S, our true selves, and from nature. And this predominates in our modern world, and that's according to Fromm's view, and that was stemming from his work decades ago. So this alienation must be even more pronounced at this time. We might wonder what he might say. So that kind of alienation might lead to a loss of or lack of sympathy for others and an estrangement from the world you live in. And I think of this, so many parts of the world now have homes sort of like this. And this is the home that raised Adam Lanza, who is the person who shot children on the East Coast. And he lived here alone, just him and his mother. And he had no connection, and his mother had her own life. And I wonder about the alienation that he might have experienced as he was alone in his own bedroom, and the worst possible consequences of destructiveness to others emerged from this sense of alienation. So how would we handle it? How do we handle it now? Well, we escape our alienation. We distract ourselves. We have fun. We seek sensory pleasures. We become very involved in mundane parts of everyday life. I think we can all recognize this in ourselves, at least in some measure. And we find a society of, well, what used to be TV, but now screen time, self-indulgence, sensory experience. And Fromm suggested way back that this will leave people fearful and susceptible to a totalitarian government, a government that takes care of them, because they are not there's not a feeling of connectedness or empowerment that comes of being part of a community. Fromm suggests that we have 5 fundamental needs psychologically, or maybe so in terms of social psychologically. Relatedness. So we are separate, we have separate skins, but we need relatedness, and love allows us to transcend our separateness without denying our uniqueness. So that's an opening of oneself, one heart space to another. Creativity is one of the 5 needs. We're not passive, we want to be creators. Giving birth is a form of creation. Planting seeds, making pottery, painting pictures, writing books. Love is a form of creativity. Creativity, he says, is expressed love. Rootedness. We need our roots to feel at home in the universe. Connect to Mother, connect to humanity, connect to nature. The parts of the connection to the land, to the long family background, that seems to be a fundamental need, and perhaps when you've been away, you recognize it. A sense of identity. So within all this collective, this relatedness, we need to have a sense of ourself. Sometimes this can be defined in part by the group, but that sense of self that's defined by the group doesn't capture the real self, the capital S self that you are. So we need to have that sense of our own uniqueness within the relatedness. And a frame of orientation. We need to understand the world and our place from it. So we need the stories that our culture tells. The society, myths, religion, philosophy, and science all provide us with a structure or a frame of orientation for viewing the world. Like we talked about with the existentialist theory in general, freedom is part of the burden. We might consider it to be part of the burden that people have to face. He would suggest that we have more freedom in this modern world, in this Western world, than we've had in previous eras. In the Middle Ages, for example, everything was predetermined. You were born into a role. If you were born a serf, then you were a serf. It was easy. There was no reason to soul search. There was no identity crisis. There wasn't the difficulty of figuring out who you are because it was predetermined by the place and family into which you were born. But freedom is frightening, necessitating soul searching, responsibility, identity exploration, doubt. It's easier, in fact, to escape freedom. Freedom is something that we want to kind of get away from as we face it. It almost feels overwhelming sometimes, and we kind of retreat. And what do we retreat back into? Well, the first of three escapes that he identified was authoritarianism. And it goes like this. As you look at that freedom, as you stand on the cliff, the world is frightening. And an individual says, I can escape fear if I fit into the prescribed life, either as the one in power or the one who is controlled. And so you can see that example from the Middle Ages, born a serf, stay a serf. And that might be an easier way than to actually face your own freedom. A second escape is destructiveness. It goes along this line. The world hurts me, and I can escape if I either destroy or negate myself through addiction, suicide, even passivity, just doing nothing, just retreating into video games. All of this is destroying or negating the self, or destroying, negating the other. Vandalism, humiliation, terrorism, or like that act of Adam Lanza, that brutal shooting. So all of these are ways that these are also, the destructiveness is another way of escaping freedom. And the third way, perhaps what's most common in our modern world, suggests that the lack of structure is frightening, and I can escape if I use other people to decide how to act, what to do, what to think, feel, and believe. And so in this case, we escape our own freedom or the opportunity to discover the true self by doing what everybody else does. And during adolescence, this is quite normal. It's part of the developmental process. But many people continue this well into adulthood and even throughout their whole lives. And in that case, it is a denial of the self and the denial of one's own freedom to discover the self. Fromm suggests that families promote particular escape styles. He describes first symbiotic families, are families in which they're so interconnected that some swallow others. So perhaps it's a domineering mother who swallows her children. They aren't allowed to develop themselves. They're only allowed to fulfill what their parents imagine for them. Or perhaps it's a child in some cultures who takes over and sort of controls or swallows the parents. They immerse their entire life and their own freedom into the child or the children. And in this case, the more common escape style would be this authoritarianism, dropping into a predefined role instead of facing your own freedom. The second kind of family is a withdrawing family. And these are families that withdraw from the communal, the heart connection that might be held within a healthier family. Cold families are the first type of family in which there's just an emotional distance between parents and children. The parents are punitive. There's punishment, negative consequences to behaviors. They're bound by rules rather than thinking, and especially individual thinking that would observe and identify characteristics of the individual. And they are success-driven, focused on these outward goals and the achievement of them. And among these families, the escape style is destructivism. The tendency to destroy the other, cause harm in that maybe school shooter way, or maybe less flagrant ways of destroying property or brutalizing, bullying other people. Or that sort of thing. Or another, he just called it modern families, but there's a type of coldness in modern families too that leaves children feeling unsettled, I would say. And that's one where children and parents view children as equals, to be friends with their children rather than parents. But as such, they aren't guiding their children or giving them the feeling of having roots and a structure into which they're growing. They're not giving them that need for a frame of orientation. So the children are too free, and that is equally cold. And so the behaviors then, in order to find something to glom onto, they glom onto peers and media. So they learn what their society is through their peers and through what's represented in popular media. And in this case, the escape style would be automaton conformity, that is, conforming without thinking to what is seen on those media sources. In a healthy, productive family, parents take responsibility to teach children reason in an atmosphere of love. In this case, it's not a free-for-all as in the modern family. The children aren't seen as equals to their parents, but there's a predominant love that impacts every guidance that's offered to the children, and the children are encouraged to think about every decision that they make. They're encouraged to reason things out, and that's the way that they're talked to. So the talk to children is respectful instead of downward. In this case, children would learn to acknowledge their freedom and to take responsibility for themselves and ultimately for society as a whole. So there are several orientations that are aligned with these family styles that Fromm calls the social unconscious. So they're forces that drive us, that come from our social structure, and they come to us unconsciously, almost like they're built into us. The first, these are offered sort of in a timeline, in terms of frameworks that were dominant in the past and are dominant now. So the oldest one is this receptive orientation and the exploitative orientation. And they go along with the symbiotic family, in which either one swallows or is swallowed. And these are people who, in the receptive orientation, people who expect to just get what they want from outside the self. They expect it to come their way, not that they have to take action to achieve it, and that it will come either immediately or in the future. But either way, it's out of their control. And this perspective was common in the bottom rungs of society, where in fact people had little control, and also in the swallowed, the ones who are whose selves are swallowed within symbiotic families. The characteristics of these people might be submissive and wishful, or perhaps just accepting and optimistic. The second is an exploitative orientation, people who expect to have to take what they need and actually prefer things if they're taken from others. This is associated with the swallower in symbiotic families, and such people can be aggressive, conceited, and seducing, or if it's less problematic or healthier, perhaps assertive, proud, and captivating. A hoarding orientation is people who expect to keep things, seeing the world as possessions and potential possessions, and this includes loved ones. So other people in their lives, including spouses and children, are also viewed as possessions that should be kept, not as beings that should be loved. It's associated with that first type of withdrawing family, the cold family, and with destructiveness as a response. Characteristics of individuals in this orientation would be stubborn, stingy, and unimaginative, or perhaps, if it's less pronounced, steadfast, economical, and practical. The marketing orientation, Fromm suggests, described people in this modern world, and this included his modern world, which was some decades ago. People who expect to sell oneself, package oneself, advertise oneself. All the clothes that they wear, the school they attend, every decision they make, the car that they drive, is all in an effort to portray themselves in a certain way. It's a product of the modern withdrawing family that doesn't give people, children especially, another framework in which to rest. Such individuals would be opportunistic, childish, tactless, or perhaps, if it's a healthier portrayal, purposeful, youthful, and social. And everything would be about the image, fashion, fitness, eternal youth, adventure, daring, novelty, sexuality, all of those things that you can present yourself in a certain way by doing certain things, but all of it is about, it's about the presentation, it's the story that is created about the self. The final, the productive orientation, is the one that he views as healthiest. And this is this person who is on this path to growth and change, one who does not shirk away from freedom and responsibility. This type of person, at his time, he said, there was not a way of systematically producing such individuals within society, but that they might emerge from a family that shows them love without smothering them, a family that prefers reasoning to rules, and prefers freedom to conformity. So a family that is advanced in this way, with a humanistic perspective, might better be able to create children who emerge with this productive orientation. Fromm talks about love as a hallmark of his thinking. He thinks of love as an art, not an experience. He thinks of it as deliberate and intentional, an action. It's not the feeling of falling in love, like Cupid shoots an arrow through your heart, which tends to be more akin to infatuation or lust, a dopamine-driven reward system. Rather, love is something that one nourishes in one's heart, pays attention to, intends, and takes action on accordingly. Love, the real kind of love, empowers a person and enables, it doesn't constrain and limit. A person who loves in this genuine sense might find that the love that he or she feels for a particular person extends outward into everyone around her. He sees love as the answer to the problem of human existence, that if our actions were based on love for our fellow humans, many of society's ills would lapse. Love gives and expands, allowing the love you feel for one person to generalize to many people. And if people are well loved, this love is more easily accessible to them. There is a poem. This is the poem I read at my daughter's wedding, and I kind of think it characterizes Fromm's view, or perhaps Fromm adapted his view from this poem. I'll read the whole thing, even though you can read it yourselves. Feel free to fast forward. You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when white wings of death scatter your days. Aye, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow. So in this verse, I think we have characterized the need for the individual to remain an individual, a true self, as distinct from the self that is formed in collegiality with this partner. Some quotes from Fromm. If a person loves only one other person and is indifferent to all others, his love is not love, but a symbiotic attachment, or an enlarged egotism. Another quote, immature love says, I love you because I need you. Mature love says, I need you because I love you. And the third one, in love, the paradox occurs that two beings become one and yet remain two. Now, in the Western wedding tradition, there's often a practice where each partner picks up the candle of their own representing themselves, and they bring their candles together to light the new candle that is one, and then each of them blows out their own candle. And I suspect that if Fromm were to comment on this, perhaps he would say that the individual candles should not be burned out, that it takes the individual candles to build on that center candle that is the union of these two people.